Hello and welcome to Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid, the podcast that delves deep into the most pressing issues facing our planet and communities today. I'm Planet Aid's Communications Manager, Haley Chitty, and I'm going to turn it over to our host, Planet Aid's Communication and Content Specialist, Monica Johnson, and I'll jump in later to ask a few follow-up questions. Monica, take it away.
Thank you so much, Haley. And again, welcome to Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid. I'm Monica Johnson, and I'm going to be your guide for this journey as we take challenging situations and try to simplify them. And it's also an opportunity for us to learn from incredible individuals and organizations at the forefront of developing and implementing sustainable solutions. Change is not only possible, but essential, and it begins with understanding. And today, we're going to be talking to Pamela Batzel, founder and owner of Finch and the Frog. And it's a language-focused market research company that, among other things, works with companies to achieve the research they need to understand how to achieve or even conceive their sustainability goals. How are you doing, Pamela?
I'm good, Monica. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course, we're so excited to be able to have you confirmed on our show to kind of talk about some of the things that companies kind of sometimes I would say struggle with or try to understand how they can communicate their sustainability efforts. So one of the things that we want to talk about first is if you can just tell us a little bit about what your services are at Finch and the Frog.
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So we specialize in qualitative and ethnographic market research, and we also run collaborative ideation sessions. Topically, we're focused on the health of the earth and its being. So I have a lot of experience, 18 or so years in healthcare. And in the last 2 to 3 years, I've moved into the sustainability space. And with a particular focus to this point on regenerative agriculture, food, water, and now textiles. So I'll back up and say for a lot of folks who might not really know what qualitative market research is about and is, I certainly didn't before I got into it. So as the traditional part of the qualitative research we do is we interview people. So we interview sustainability leaders or just regular people, and we may be asking them about how they use water or how they make choices about clothing if they care about sustainability. If you talk to sustainability leaders, you might be asking them, what is their company focused on? What are their challenges? What initiatives are they looking forward to doing? Our questions come from usually a sponsoring client. Usually that's a company, and they have a business situation, and they then have a set of research questions. The company coming to do the research might be just getting into an area that's new and want to better understand their audience or potential audience, or they might want to better understand what are the segments in their audience. They might want to understand things that are emotional drivers, but they also might want to understand things that are more practical drivers and hurdles. Sometimes clients actually have a product or a program that they've developed or in the midst of developing and want to get a sense for how receptive their potential audiences would be to that program. They may be all the way down the line where they've finished their program and product, and now they're to the point where they want to test messages. There are these different advertising messages, and you want to check, well, how do people make sense of those messages? Do they resonate? Are they motivating? So all kinds of different, phases in where a company may be wanting to do qualitative research. Of course, they do quantitative research too. I'm focused on the qualitative side. And then we also do ethnographic work. More often, our ethnographic work is looking at social media data and digging into communities and what's going on in communities and what does that tell us about how the community is making sense of their world relative to the particular topic that social media community is gathered together to talk about. And our specialty is really in understanding the meanings being conveyed in language. Of course, the obvious surface meanings, but also meanings that go beneath the surface. There's a lot in language that gets encoded or embedded. So we do language semiotics or discourse analysis, linguistics, kind of in that realm of really looking at the language to understand embedded meanings.
Okay, so what are language semiotics? If you can break that down a little bit more, why look at language in this way, and what are you ultimately looking for?
So as humans, we express a lot with language. And as I said, there's a lot that we say that's direct and clear. I have a dog and his name is Liam. And there it is. I have a dog, his name is Amos, stripping clear. But there's a lot that we do and say about our worldviews indirectly and even without realizing it. So there's lots of research to show how we embed, say, gender into language. I might say, hey, can you connect me with your administrative assistant? Does she prefer that I contact her by phone or email? I don't know if your administrative assistant is a man or a woman, but I have embedded into there that I persona to a mechanic. Hey, what did the mechanic find? Does he think there's going to be a lot of work needing done? The mechanic might be a woman, I don't know. So this is to say that significant belief systems and expectations about the way the world works gets embedded in language and then reinforced. If we keep using language in those assumptions, it reinforces that's the way it is and that's the way it should be. Beliefs about ourselves and others and institutions. We use language to convey and create relationships, such as who and what is good or who and what is not so good and why, who belongs to what groups. So to take this back to the work at Finch and the Frog and what we're doing, we're attending to how people are using language. We're looking at word choices, we're looking at sentence structures, constructions, the stories people tell, and then those stories, what narratives might they support? So
very, very good. And I know a little bit about your background as far as being a journalist. How does that help you in any way in this particular work that you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. Journalism is really helpful in terms of, you're out interviewing people and just getting comfortable. That's probably maybe one of the biggest things for me. It's different in market research. You often have your clients are observing you and watching you while you're doing the interviews or listening in on the recordings. That's a big difference. Whereas newspaper, you didn't have that. And that was nicer for my introverted part of myself to not have kind of that. That's kind of one of the things that I find most difficult. But yeah, and I learned to ask questions without, now we use discussion guides. So collaborate with the client and make sure that you're aligned on the questions that you're asking, where, I was more coming up with questions in journalism. So it has a benefit because it allows me to I was already habituated and understood digging in and going further or going kind of off the path to get into things. So I would say those are ways that journalism really helped me.
Yeah, I thought there was a tie-in. It seemed like there was a great tie-in for that, and a natural way for you to get into this. It sounds like the work that you're doing is very strategy related or branding related. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. Our findings from the research and the insights from our research are helping companies set out their strategy, whether it's their strategy for positioning, their go-to-market strategy. As we're helping them, talked a little bit earlier, helping them understand their audience, then they're going to have a sense for how to talk to and speak to their audience through the strategy around that and connecting with their audience. I'll give super obvious examples of why audience matters. And everyone will see this. I don't necessarily need market research for this, but just to convey the notion, if you're talking to clothing consumers who think of themselves as economical and thrifty, you probably don't want a Mercedes-Benz in the imagery, right? It's a dissonance. Those don't go together. You might say if you're talking to vegans, you don't want to be projecting, say, cowboy narratives. Although maybe you do if you're clever and creative and you're going to rewrite cowboy narratives, right? And you're doing something clever. But you have to be careful. The point is that comes into strategy is how you're going to reach your audience, talk to your audience, and relate to your audience. That said, and to be fair, companies that engage market research conduct many studies. So if they come to us for a study, we're one part of different studies. I gave the example of quant. We can partner with quant companies, but that's not really our specialty area. So it's not to this point an area that we've gotten into because there are other companies that can do a much better job because that's their area of expertise. And then the other way that we can help with strategy and branding is through brainstorming workshops. So we can help them work through how they want to act on their research insights. So gathering all those different studies, creating activities to get folks to engage with the different studies and then think about, well, how would they want to implement? What's going to make sense? Company maybe have lots of insights, and then you have to narrow to what's most actionable, what makes the most sense given their audience, what makes the most sense given the culture and the finances of the company. So that's another way in which we can help with that.
Just a follow-up question to that, because I imagine that some of these companies that may come to you may come maybe bruised and battered from having a bad messaging campaign. So how do you kind of help them to overcome that? Because I think in the beginning of the kind of green movement or sustainability movement, people were kind of slapping a green label on and not paying attention to the details of what really would be considered sustainable. So if they come to you in that particular manner, how do you kind of relate to them and kind of get them back on track?
Yeah, I would say from my experience, more what I've had is the work that I've done to date. For me, I've
Mm-hmm.
encountered where companies are navigating and wary a little bit about
Mm-hmm.
greenwashing. And that's not to say there aren't companies out there that aren't greenwashing. And in fact,
Right.
there's some rules. I just saw that by 2026 in the EU, companies are not going to be allowed to claim that their product is carbon neutral if they're getting there through offsetting. So there's more pressures on companies
Mm,
not to do this greenwashing.
right.
And offsetting is where I might be an airline and put out all this carbon into the air, but then I offset it because I protect some some area of rainforest that's an
Right.
equivalent amount of carbon protection.
Well, in our pre-interview, you talked a bit about a particular study that you worked on, and you described the takeaway as for researchers, and this I quote, for researchers conducting research in transitional spaces, it's all that much more important to assess and understand paradigm shifts and tensions. Can you talk more about the study and what you mean by this takeaway?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just briefly say, we talked earlier about language and things that language conveys and creates our worldviews, our paradigms.
Mhm.
So let me start by saying just a bit about the study and then the two paradigms that emerged. I'll kind of toggle back and forth, by giving
Sure.
context and then answering the question. So the study concerned the sustainability space and more particularly agriculture and the food industry. So in the study, we ended up encountering two somewhat at odds paradigms. So the one was this paradigm of transactionality. We have this thing, service, product, and we're going to exchange this to you for money. The other paradigm that we encountered was one of collaboration and cooperation. So to back up and give more context about the study, so the study was focused in the space of food, agriculture, and then more specifically regenerative agriculture. Regenerative agriculture improves the soil, the health of the soil. In fact, it takes dead earth, dirt, and makes it into living earth, soil. It does that through by keeping the field covered with crops, and so there's roots under the soil. It improves the nutrients, it improves the health of the plants. It can lead to less rate reduction in use of, say, herbicides, pesticides, chemicals, reduces water runoff, and can also lead to capture of carbon in the soil. So the study's goal was to learn whether and why food companies value this practice.
Mhm.
The client sponsoring the study was interested in selling an outcome related to that as a transaction. We're going to do this thing for you, and you get this outcome you pay for, a thing for money exchange. But the sustainability leaders that I was talking to from these food companies, most of them multinational, but national, multinational, large companies, most often were interested really in a collaborative approach to this practice. Why? Well, they wanted to have influence in the design to make sure that the particular practices and outcomes that were involved in that particular manifestation of regen ag were suited to their company and what they were looking for. And second, because there was this desire among these companies to leverage pilot studies they were already engaged in and extend and expand regenerative agriculture in a way that is less this ongoing product, but just transforming the way that farming is done to this regenerative agriculture. What I think is really going to be interesting and important to watch is that over time, where and how a partnership paradigm can play, and then where and how a competition paradigm plays, particularly in this world of sustainability. Where and how are they going to intersect? Do they change the shape of each other? We can start to ask ourselves, where do partnerships play in the business world when it comes to sustainability? Where does a partnership paradigm meet a wall? How can we create and nurture partnerships? in what ways will newly evolving partnerships shift the way sustainability works and economics maybe even are approached? We have to remember we're in an economy where companies compete, right? They compete for customers, they compete for sales, they compete for profit. So there's built-in limitations to cooperation, and yet we see it starting to happen.
Okay, so we actually met at the Regenerative Agriculture and Textiles Conference in Washington, D.C. Last year, and there was certainly a lot of talk about partnerships there. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think what I found was really interesting was that people were saying that the textiles industry is not as far along as the food industry in terms of using partnerships to drive regen ag, and that suggests itself an opportunity for partnership. The textiles to collaborate with the food industry. And in fact, that's starting to happen, which I'll give an example of that. But just to reflect on what we were just talking about, it makes sense, right? If textiles and ag or food, big food, sorry, both need agriculture, textiles and foods don't compete directly, but textiles companies might compete. So there you go. Right. There's another, well, here's a way where we can collaborate and see the path more easily if you're pairing together, say, a food and textiles company. But what are the opportunities and hurdles when you're having maybe cooperations and looking for collaborations between textiles companies? So I recently spoke with Zach Angelini. He's a co-founder of the Public Good Provisions, and he spoke at the Regen Ag Textiles Conference along with Gina Nagel. They both are co-founders of the Public Good Provisions. And he talked at the conference, and then in more detail with me a couple of weeks ago, we were talking. He said he had worked at Timberline as their global sustainability lead. And he was within the space of Timberline able to mount some products that they might sell on Earth Day, but they couldn't produce enough of a product that was associated with Regen Ag to do more than just a short run, like an Earth Day run. We might think of Timberline as really big, but in the context of things, but it's not. And so he ended up partnering with Gina Nagel, who was then at Applegate, a food company, and they expanded what they were each able to do by partnering. And then they left and formed their own company, this Public Good Provision, to help network and create relationships between companies so that they can expand the use of regen ag and start to scale regen ag so it moves beyond just state pilot projects and it can be used more. You can make more than just say a short run of a product.
From your experience, how are companies approaching the marketing of their sustainability initiatives?
In terms of what they're doing, it's a mix, and that can be influenced by the size of the company, where it sits in the supply chain. Say Timberline, we're aware of Timberline, and that sits at the end of the supply chain. There's lots of companies that are higher in the supply chain that, as everyday people, we're not familiar with them. Less pressure on them in a way than, say, for a General Mills or a Timberline or, Pepsi, anyone who's more public facing. And then there's external pressures, which can be stockholders or shareholders, but also now increasingly government roles, probably more from Europe than in the U.S., but those still apply to companies because many companies are doing business in and through Europe. Internal cultures, belief systems, all of this affects kind of what and how much they're doing in sustainability and how they're branding it. And sometimes they're not even branding. It goes back to that greenwashing concern. There is a concern. So how can they make a claim, safely make a claim that this product is green and in what way? So that can be a hurdle. What I do see is that where they're focusing their efforts for sustainability can be impacted by who they are, what they do. So I talked to a person at a vegan food products company, and they have been putting effort into funding studies, scientific studies, to show they have a lower carbon footprint than their equivalent non-vegan product, right? So if they have a vegan product that has, say, cheese in it, but it's not milk, and they compare that to a cheese that has milk, they're showing they have a lower footprint, which is generally known, but they're getting the studies. And that makes sense because that's an advantage they have as a company out of the gate, is a likely lower carbon footprint because they're not using animal products. or another company that works in packaging space put a strong emphasis on circularity. That makes sense because, they're selling packaging to companies that need to pack their products in packages, and that packaging gets sent to consumer, and a lot of times that gets thrown away, hopefully recycled. But so they're focusing on that space. And it seems to me that Planet Aid is really taking advantage of how you're aligned with the values of reduce, reuse, recycle. It's clear your impact on people. You're donating profits to projects like teacher training, child aid, farmers club in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But now you're also, such as through this podcast, drawing more attention to how Planet Aid and the people who donate to Planet Aid are helping the earth. There's this astounding statistic on your website that says 85% or Americans throw away 85% of unwanted clothes, as opposed to donating them, putting them in a yellow bin for Planet Aid, right? So you're drawing increased attention to the impact of Planet Aid's work on the environment. So you're leaning into a strength that you already have. So it looks like companies do that. I mean, there's so many things to be doing and focusing on for any one company in terms of our impact on the environment. Companies having to make choices to some degree about where that focus is.
That a company like yours, a company that helps companies with language and rhetoric, might be perceived as a business that helps customers or helps businesses greenwash. So what do you say to someone who presumes that?
That's a great question. And when you had asked that to me, it just did not really occur to me that possible interpretation. I looked at the website. I was like, oh yeah, I could see where people would think that is what it's about. And the website could use a refresh anyways, but that's not our intention, is I guess what I can say. And I've not yet encountered people who've said that to me. Now it's possible, just like you said it to me, it's possible people are thinking it and not saying it to me. So I appreciated the question and like, oh yeah, I need to think more about that. But it's not our intention. And I think from what I've encountered so far, the companies that I've worked with, they're wary of greenwashing. And so they're stepping a bit carefully. And then there's just this added pressure, such as will become effective in 2026 in Europe that I had mentioned a little bit ago, that's going to dispermit companies to say that they're climate neutral or environmentally friendly if they're getting to carbon reduction goals by offsetting, doing it outside of their supply chain. Speaking of language, it's interesting because The Guardian, I saw the article in The Guardian, and they said, I'll just read a little bit from it. It says, the new rule comes amid widespread concern about the environmental impact of carbon offsetting schemes, which have often been used to justify labeling products carbon neutral or imply that consumers can fly, buy new clothes, or eat certain foods without making the climate crisis worse. There's language, and like that rule and law, in fact, is attending to the way that language is powerful, that you say it's carbon neutral. And maybe, you don't want to devalue saving rainforests and preserving rainforests. That's valuable, from my point of view. But you can see if you're calling it carbon neutral from a consumer point of view who doesn't know the ins and outs of how this world is working, oh, okay, great. Like you're using, some kind of special fuel that is carbon neutral, and I can fly as much as I want. You can see where that conclusion comes. And it comes back to language and how language is powerful in the way it can work.
So it's just really interesting about how the companies really are having to step up because there's just interest that they probably haven't been used to, but now it's being demanded that they make a change and do things that are helpful to the environment.
Yeah, a lot more information coming out, and people are aware. And I think younger generations have learned and heard a lot about it coming up through school, and so they have the knowledge from that point of view. And then now, there's so much that you can access online through research that, that makes it easier to find information and look and put pressure on and make more considered choices. So for sure.
Right. And from what I understand, it's one of the top concerns that they have, the environment. So would it be fair to say that you have a personal excitement or conviction about global environmentalism and stewardship? And I've looked at your social media pages and posts, so it seems like you are excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a conviction. Really, it's really important. it's what's challenging, I think, is that all production and consumption practices just have these far-reaching impacts on the earth. And we talk a lot about carbon. That gets a lot of press, and I think the general population is very alert and attuned to carbon. But there's also significant problems with pollution and species loss and degradation of ecosystems that are maybe tangled with carbon, but separate in the sense that they're coming from all these chemicals that we use in all kinds of ways and places. So thankfully, that also is starting to get more play and attention, that it's not just carbon, it's about all of the pollutions that we're causing. And, some of it you see, like someone dumps something they had from a fast food restaurant and saw on the ground. Like that's pollution we're used to seeing, but there's lots of pollution that, of course, is more invisible. So yeah, the ocean, I would say the ocean and land are really under siege. There was a 2023 study from the Proceedings of the National Academy of the Sciences that says that pesticides and herbicides are the largest cause of bird decline in Europe. And I mean, this is so long, what was it, the 1970s that Rachel Carson wrote A Silent Spring, and here we are, and it's still a big problem. Solutions are harder, right? Like you find the problem and you can predict what the problem is, but solving it and changing and against the inertia, against the bigness of the way the world works, to shift that is clearly harder. But yes, certainly it's definitely a conviction and important. Excited is like harder, like it's exciting, but it's serious, and
It is.
there's a lot you'll see on social media and other places, like, and then lots of places will talk about like the burden when you're making contact with what's happening. There's a psychological burden to it. So yeah, it takes work to maintain that positivity and that positive focus while you're also making contact with the reality of what kind of has happened and is happening.
Right. So how did this conviction develop? And also, how did it have any bearing on, or did it, I should say, have it any bearing on how you opened up your business to conduct sustainable research?
Yeah, for sure. As a kid, I was lucky. I lived in a neighborhood, and behind our neighborhood was woods, and I was in those woods a lot. And down at the creek, I'm from Pennsylvania or Western PA, and we say creek. And so I spent a lot of time in the woods and down at the creek, and I actually really miss those woods and that creek. So that was definitely influential. And then I remember I was in elementary school, so I'm 50, so this would have been the early 1980s, and there was a movie they showed us in elementary school about a junkyard, and there was a character, and he, I guess, ran the junkyard. And the movie was really about consumption and geared to little kids. And that made a big impression on me. I mean, I could just look at that and see like all that garbage we're creating as humans. And you just kind of instinctively immediately knew that that's not sustainable. You can't just keep, at some point, there's not sustainable. No, I wouldn't as a little kid have had a sense of, so much of the pollutions that were the ones I talked about, the ones you don't see. But you see all the garbage in the junkyard, and then, it's easy to make the connection to what about all the animals that would have lived or around there, or the birds and so forth.
Right. So what's the meaning behind your business, Finch and the Frog?
But there are several related or nested meanings. One is the first is finch represents evolution, like Darwin's finches, and frogs are really sensitive. So I like to think that we're really sensitive to meaning and language, and that we're attuned to the evolutions, like the social cultural evolutions that can come through in language. And of course, there's this literal honoring of the beings on the planet, from those above, like the finch, and those below. And then speaking of the one below here, the frog, frogs point back. They're very sensitive, and they're a bit like the canary in the coal mine, and their deaths can alert us to pollution in ecosystems. There's a more complicated additional problem with frogs too now, which they have this fungus, and it's spread largely worldwide and has really decimating their populations. They don't precisely know, but they think it came from like amphibian trading, like making pets of frogs, and they got crossed out of ecosystems where that frogs could handle that fungus to places where they couldn't. But even withstanding that kind of massive problem for frogs, they're also sensitive and can alert to pollution. They'll be like earlier just to die and signal there's a problem in the system.
Wow. Take us through a typical ask from a client For example, where do you start with research, mining data, realistic timelines, and recommendations?
So all of our projects start with just getting a clear understanding of what's the client's business situation. Why are they coming to us? What are their research questions? What hypotheses do they have? What do they know? What do they think they know? What do they need to do this research to accomplish? And as I mentioned earlier, then maybe they have a new program that they're thinking of putting together. Maybe they've already put it together. Maybe they're thinking about entering into an area and doing some work in an area that they haven't done before. So you just really need to spend some time talking and understanding what they want to do. And again, what their hypotheses are, what their assumptions are.
Mhm.
And then how long research takes, it depends partly on what audience that you're speaking to. So if you're going to speak to people from the general population, you can recruit people relatively quickly. If you want to talk to sustainability leaders or other business leaders,
Mm,
it's going to be a longer time.
yeah.
Everybody wants to talk to them. They're busy. I mean, they're busy separate from everyone wanting to talk to them. There's just a lot they're doing, and
Mhm.
everyone wants to talk to them. So that's going to take longer. So research can take weeks to several months. And of course, interviews are a common method that we'll use, and but there are other methods you can use. The one I didn't talk about earlier, you can have people do online exercises. So like there's software, like Recollect is software, and you have people do exercises online. So you might want to get creative with people and have them say, draw a picture of what they think pollution looks like, or list all of the words that immediately come to mind for them. If you say garbage or trash, draw a picture of sustainability, or share a story about something they did that they perceived as sustainable. You get concepts of what they think sustainable is,
Mhm. Mhm.
or concepts of how they think about recycling. You might even ask them to tell a story of something that they did that was bad for the environment and get a sense for how what they conceptualize is not good for the environment. Now, that one might be tricky because people don't want to admit to having done things bad for the environment. But
Right.
and then another method is just, as I talked about earlier, is to analyze what people say on social media. So those are routes to answering clients' questions, and you can couple those. You can do all three of those or two of those methods. And again, of course, in addition to quant, but quant usually follows. It's your qualitative. You typically are going to do early and first, typically, and then you're going to follow with quant to get more of the numbers that go around that.
What what are kind of the client's responses when they get some of that data?
I think the hardest is when you find things that go against what they were expecting and that make more difficult if they're down the line with something that they're trying to do and want to do. And, the data is coming back and saying, that may not play so well. That's a harder for them to be receptive to. The earlier they are in the research and getting the insights earlier in research, the better, because they can either, well, we're not going to go do that program, that doesn't make sense, or going to fundamentally shift the program or shift the product that we're creating. And then sometimes, especially at the early on, it can be, oh wow, that's so interesting. We had no idea. Or, sometimes that makes sense when you tell us that, but again, wouldn't have really expected. But sometimes it's expected. It just gives a nuance and a depth because you're
Mhm.
hearing it through the voices of your audience and
Right.
potential audience. And so it brings to life the concerns and, emotions are so much important of understanding when you're creating products and programs, and then the marketing of them too. Like emotions are key to that. So that can be really helpful for people to have that, even if sometimes it's, yeah, we would have expected this, but it just comes with a depth.
You have an 11-year background in journalism, which requires an understanding of context and tracking down facts and investigating topics. And for the last 17 years, you've been working in market research and specializing in qualitative methods, relying on many of the same attributes of journalism. So, what provided the impetus to bring these two worlds together to help other businesses specifically?
I guess I'll start with my move from journalism, and I was really lucky. I think serendipity has like guided my life, and maybe that's like that for so many of us. But
Mhm.
um, I got a lot of great experience and was really lucky working in newspaper. Interviewed a lot of people, wrote some really cool stories, some quite fun, like WWF players at the county fair. Got to interview them. That's sort of silly, but it was fun. I had some fun stuff. But I felt like I had gone as far as I wanted in journalism. particularly, the kind of journalism that I was in. And it was serendipity. I ended up interviewing a woman who was a market researcher, and she said, "Oh, you're really good. I know, I'm a moderator." To which I said, "Was a moderator." Like, so I knew to explain market research because, you don't really know. But she sent me in the direction of pharma. She worked in pharmaceuticals, and saying it's a complicated, rich area and will kind of keep my interest. And that's really been true of pharma research. So that's how I ended up on this path. And then I went back to school in 2018-19. I went to Carnegie Mellon and did their rhetoric program, a lot for the discourse analysis part of it and understanding audience, and thinking through the lens of audience. And that was a one-year master's program. And so when I came out, I decided I was going to open up my own shop. And then prior to that, I had worked at companies that really only worked in pharma. And so then I had the space to expand into sustainability, which, as discussed earlier, is something I care a lot about. So health of people, health of the planet.
Thank you so much for answering my questions. I think Haley has been listening intently, so I know that he has a few questions for you as well.
Very good. Thank you so much, Monica.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I just wanted to maybe circle back a little bit on what you're seeing in terms of consumer demand driving change. And are you seeing that? Are you seeing that impact their bottom line? And is that motivating some of these sustainability efforts? And then, how does effectively communicating those efforts impact the bottom line?
Great question. I think it depends on, this goes back to audience and segments, right? So you have, and sustainability leaders will talk about this. If you have a boutique brand and you have a boutique brand that is geared around sustainability, maybe because it's vegan, maybe because it's clothing that is billed as sustainable in some way, well, then you're attracting an audience that's looking for that. So that's driving your business. That's what your business is about in many ways. And some businesses are starting to convert to that. But there's this challenge when you just look across the larger global population and even the larger US population, where you take food, for instance, where people are we're in a recession, people are in a recession, and so they don't have money and they don't want to spend extra money. So if you're going to start to try to make products more expensive because you've brought in more elements that make it more sustainable, it's harder to get people to pay for that at the till. I've had some people say that in interviews, some sustainability leaders. So we're not yet to the point where people are going to pay for this at the till. So the cash register, it's a very UK way of saying it. So there is this challenge of who's going to pay, as one person said, who's paying for the transition? And it's a challenge, just like that. When we talked earlier about partnership versus competition, you have that aspect, and you have the companies are still looking for profit. And they're having to make, who's paying for this? And I think that is the thing that slows and makes challenging to figure out how to make movement. But I think important to remember that if you think of the population, the largest segments of the population, money is a factor, right? And people are having to make, somewhat thrifty decisions until you get to people who have a higher income and then can make decisions. I'm going to buy this piece of clothing or these foods at the grocery store because they're more sustainable. Or in the case of health, maybe people are somewhat making a lot by their own health. I'm going to buy organic because I don't want chemicals myself.
Sort of similarly, do you see the market research and the messaging efforts go upstream and impact business practices? So maybe some success around some sustainability messaging would motivate the company to do more, to be more sustainable.
I know from talking to sustainability leaders that, it's been a process to bring along upper management. And some will say, okay, now we have upper management on board and they understand and they're invested and they want to work in this direction. And then if it's a large company, it's like bringing along the entire company that, has a culture in a way it functions and is looking to make money and in the most kind of seamless, profitable way it can. So there are there are different efforts and ways that you're trying to influence the culture of the company and the leadership. to move along to more sustainability. And of course, that there is that concern about affordability. Like, yes, we need to make these changes, want to make these changes, but how can we do it and still be profitable, still stay in business? I can't remember if there was a sustainability in the year. I talked, it would be much better if I could remember the phrase, but the essence was, well, we're not doing much good if we've been so sustainable that we go out of business. I mean, at the farthest extreme, that's the tension, right?
Maybe just one final one here. And with all your market research, I'm wondering, what are some of the prevalent misconceptions around sustainability that these audiences have that kind of need to be addressed and able to effectively communicate with them?
It's interesting. I've got one thing that stands out, just use one example, that I think that there's kind of a tension, an irony here. I think when you ask regular people about sustainability, they may say things like, oh, I really care about sustainability. I try to recycle. It boils down to recycling, which is important, right? And there's a broader concept to recycling too. There's the reduce, reuse, recycle, and this idea of circularity that is just starting to build. But I think among general population, there's not much depth of understanding of that. And I think there's a lack of understanding of pollution and all the chemicals that are in the world, like the study I referred to earlier, where the biggest cause of bird loss is herbicides and pesticides in Europe. I think people don't understand that. And yet it's right there. I mean, plastics are a type of pollution, right? But, somehow that concept. And there's this idea of like, well, what can I do? I recycle this. And then the people on the other end are supposed to take care of the recycling. Mm-hmm. But I think there's not yet a depth of appreciation, understanding of kind of pollution of all sorts, what's happening in the ocean and the ocean health. So I actually just started a course on behavior change, ocean and the behavior change. So I think there's a lot yet for people to really understand the kind of the depth and breadth of the problem and how we're all implicated and how our choices each day make a difference.
Right. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Sustainable Solutions with Planet Aid. We hope you've been inspired by the ideas that have been explored in this episode. And today, we want to encourage you to search for sustainable solutions you can pursue so that you can be a good steward in your neck of the woods. Haley?
Thank you, Monica. A few reminders to the listeners on our way out. If you want to stay connected with us and stay informed about the latest sustainable solutions, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And please share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Together, we can make a difference. And remember, change starts with awareness and action. So let's keep the conversation going. Feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our website. Share your thoughts, ideas, and stories with us. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, remember, it's a big world out there, but every small change counts. Together. We can build a more sustainable future. Thanks and have a good one.